Okay, everyone, a brilliant filing from the government in Don Lemon's criminal case. Every defense attorney in the case should give a copy of the government's filing to his or her client, especially the journalist-defendants who assert they have an enhanced right or privilege under the First Amendment. They do not, contrary to what might be their perception. So let's break it down, the alleged journalist privilege. Now, when was the last time any of us have seen a news organization barge into a church or any house of worship, record the proceedings, conduct interviews, etc.? Never, I would guess. Most of us probably have never seen that until Don Lemon live streamed himself doing that in January. Now, the government's filing from about page 7 to page 9, top of page 10, demolishes the defendant's assertions about an alleged journalistic privilege that protects their activism or journalism at the church. Quoting from the Supreme Court of the United States, generally applicable laws do not offend the First Amendment simply because their enforcement against the press has an incidental effect on its ability to gather and report the news, and enforcement of such general laws against the press is not subject to stricter scrutiny that would be applied to enforcement against other persons or organizations. Boom. Lemon and the rest of the journalists might assert that the First Amendment rights of worshipers impeded their own rights as journalists, but the Supreme Court here calls that incidental, an incidental effect on the ability to gather news and report the news. Now, further quoting from the Supreme Court, it would be frivolous to assert that the First Amendment, in the interest of securing news or otherwise, confers a license on either the reporter or his news sources to violate valid criminal laws. The government goes on to say that journalists have no special right to violate the FACE Act, which prohibits impeding access to abortion clinics or houses of worship. Quoting from the Supreme Court, the purpose of the Constitution was not to erect the press into a privileged institution, but to protect all persons in their right to print what they will as well as to utter it. The liberty of the press is no greater than the liberty of every citizen of the Republic. Kaboom! Quoting from the Supreme Court, the publisher of a newspaper has no special immunity from the application of general laws. He has no special privilege to invade the rights and liberties of others. Now, according to the Supreme Court, the right to speak and publish does not carry with it the unrestrained right to gather information, and newsmen have no constitutional right of access to the scenes of crime. So let's stop there. That quote about crime scenes paints a picture of just what Lemon and the journalist co-defendants are arguing here. They say they were reporting on the activist co-defendants. They've said that. Investigative journalism, that's their argument, their defense. The legal strategy of the journalist co-defendants from the start has been to separate themselves into a distinct group. Now, here the government's filing exposes just how odd the defense argument is. For example, what if I say I disguised myself as the getaway driver, but I'm really just reporting on the bank robbery? Now, if I'm part of a law enforcement investigation, I could believe it, but a journalist? A news organization would never approve such means of getting a story. Now, we've heard about journalists being embedded with troops. We've heard that. But almost always friendly or allied troops. If the troops are enemy troops, the journalists might be forced into deep cover just to avoid being killed, wouldn't they? Committing crimes with the troops to avoid being killed by them. Now, that's not even a defense to the crimes they commit, but an argument to reduce their punishment or potentially to get a plea deal. Now, maybe Lemon and his journalist co-defendants are saying they went along with the activist defendants initially to get the story, but then they went on to violate the FACE Act and the KKK Act because they were afraid not to. And that would be the problem with arguing deep cover, because the only folks who looked afraid on the live streams were the churchgoers. Children at the church later testified they thought that their parents were going to die. Now, some of the testimony from churchgoers was they thought it was the prelude to a mass shooting. So, the investigative journalism defense falls apart when we break it down. Who were they investigating? The activists themselves, who invaded the church to quote-unquote protest a pastor's day job as a field director for ICE. Now, that was the story they were covering, allegedly. I'll say this. If Don Lemon had been working with law enforcement undercover to infiltrate the activist group, I might believe the first part of the conduct he's accused of, attending the planning meeting, discussing logistics, discussing disguises they would wear to gain entry to the church through deception. But then, to go into the church and conduct interviews, blasting the churchgoers for allegedly not standing with immigrants. I mean, that's not investigative journalism, more like hostage interviews. Are Lemon and company now arguing that they themselves were hostages of the larger activist group? Now, the government also emphasizes there is no right of journalists or activists to record things of interest happening on private property. And that's so on point for Don Lemon. He was trespassing at the church and tries to justify his trespassing on the ground of investigative journalism. Again, I'll say, if he were undercover with law enforcement, that might be credible, but not undercover as a journalist. The analogy cannot be extended in that direction. The gist of the First Amendment is that the people are free from undue governmental interference in our freedoms of speech, worship, the press, peaceful assembly, and petition. Now, here, Don Lemon and friends have crafted a role for themselves that places them on both sides of that equation, as the government and the governed. Government, because they say the press has a special privilege to investigate, as if equating themselves to law enforcement. And how convenient, because that would mean they shouldn't be prosecuted. How convenient. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.